Okay, so we're going to read chapter 9 and 10 of Esther tonight. So we'll go ahead and start with chapter 9. The title at the top of this chapter in my Bible is "The Jews Destroy Their Tormentors." There's another little note here. It says, "The Jews slay their enemies, including the 10 sons of Haman." It says 20, the 2 days of Purim made a festival. So we'll find that out at the end about what that means, the festival for Purim, how that came about. Chapter 9, verse 1. Now, in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. Verse 2, the Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. So you've got everybody in the land is afraid of the Jews, and then you've got the officials that are working for the king are afraid of Mordecai, because he's now second in command. So they're wanting to make sure they do what he wants, because, you know, the concern that if they don't, there may be reprisal maybe. So verse 4, for Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. So this is like 2 or 3 times now it says those who hated them. So there must have been some kind of indicator of who these people were, whether maybe they were recorded by Haman for accepting money to destroy the Jews. It's not very clear right now that that's the case, but there was some way to indicate that they're the people who were going to do the Jewish people harm. So I don't know if it was once this started, they just kind of came out the woodwork to start hurting the Jews, because there was that initial edict that gave them the right to do that. Or I would think more likely there's probably like a record of everybody who agreed to destroy Jewish people for money. And in Shushan the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And also, and this would be the list right now of Haman's sons, which include Parshandatha, Dalphon, Espatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Bejesatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha. The enemy of the Jews they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. So it was important for whoever is writing this that they put that they killed these people, but they didn't plunder them. They didn't take any more advantage than defending themselves or avenging themselves, or however you want to look at it. Maybe not avenging, but protecting themselves from the people who were going to, or who agreed to destroy them. Verse 11, on that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan, the citadel, was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the citadel, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? So he asks that, but then he also says, now what is your position? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. So it's interesting to me, he's constantly asking Esther more. What does she want? So he's just happy to do what she wants, to the point that after fulfilling her request, he's wanting to know again, what else do you want? Verse 13, then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. So I've always wondered, okay, so they've killed 500, now they've killed 300 more. So guessing it was probably just known that, okay, we've got 500, but maybe they weren't able to kind of get through everybody who had sought harm to the Jewish people. So that additional day in the city of Shushan seemed to be important to Esther to be able to get rid of anybody else who would cause trouble. I think it's important to note as well that you've got Haman's 10 sons, and it's just very likely that that they were destroyed because of their father and the potential that they might want to, avenge their father or take revenge for their father and in the future, or cause issues because of that lineage to somebody who was in power. It's hard to say, but anyway, verse 16, the remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. So when it says they protect their life, it seems like maybe there was some active force coming after them, or maybe this was just another way of saying, hey, we're protecting our life because we've already identified these people who are a danger to us. If you know someone's been plotting to kill you, you do something about it. Currently that person would go to jail and suffer legal consequences. But in this time, that's how they dealt. That's how the government dealt with things. They just took people out. So, but it says there were 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. So this is not even just in Shushan, but in the rest of the 127 provinces. None of the Jews took anything for themselves, it seems. They just acted in a way to keep themselves safe and prevent people from harming them. Verse 17, this was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the month, they rested and made a day of feasting and gladness. All right, little subtitle here, the Feast of Purim. Verse 18, but the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th, and on the 15th of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So we can see the difference between everybody in the countryside and the other provinces. They rested and celebrated on the 14th day. And then because Esther had requested a second day in Shushan, now you've got the 15th day of the month, which the people and the inhabitants of the city have used to celebrate and rest. Verse 19, therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and the 15th days of the month of Adar. Verse 22, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. And I think too, it's important to see that they just get through this conflict, and that a lot of men and individuals were killed, and now they're celebrating and they're sending gifts to each other. But I think it's important to remember too that for a whole year, or close to a year, 8 months, I think, they were waiting with nothing they could do, or for a year actually, they were waiting with nothing they could do, potentially to protect themselves until the other edicts came out. And I think that's where the 8 months came from, because they had about 8 months to prepare themselves to protect themselves. But still, you had to be able to protect yourself. And obviously by the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month, they were ready and they had a lot of support, and they even had people converting. And so, the relief has now come. They've got rest from their enemies. So it's a prevailing theme in the Bible where God's people kind of get themselves into a position where their enemies seem to get an upper hand and God delivers. And once the deliverance happens, there's celebration, there's rest. Verse 23, so the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them. Verse 24, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. So that's where the root for the feast Purim comes from, and pur means the lot, because he used dice essentially to figure out what day this was going to take place on. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows, which they were. Verse 26, so they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them. Verse 27, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year according to the written instructions and according to the prescribed time. Now, I didn't look this up, but I heard that these feasts are still celebrated by the Jewish people, and if that's true, then that shows that, okay, at the least, we have this holiday, we have a record of when it started, and if this record's true, and this is what started those feasts and those holidays, then that just gives a little bit more validity to the history of these stories, and helps to kind of verify the historical data in this book. Let's see, verse 28, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Verse 29, then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. Verse 30, and Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. All right, then we've got chapter 10. I'm going to go ahead and throw that one in because it's like 3 verses, so it won't take very long to get through. So chapter 10, we've got Mordecai's advancement is the title, and the little subtitle or a little more information. Mordecai is rewarded by King Ahasuerus is what it says. So verse 1, and King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. All right, so that wraps up the book of Esther, and I think it was definitely fun to get through. I really enjoyed reading this book. I look forward to continuing doing some more books just as I go through the Bible. And I'm hoping I can provide some more valuable information. I know some things that I learned reading through Esther this time. The big thing that stood out to me is the way that Mordecai, that some scholars, theologians, and some people who study the Bible see him as a type of Christ. So we can look at a lot of different examples in the Bible of characters that came before Jesus came to earth, before Christ was here on earth. And they kind of, their life kind of typifies Christ in some way. And so we see Mordecai, who a little bit different than Christ, was supposed to be put on a gallows, on a tree, on a stake, to die and to be destroyed. He didn't go there, but his enemy Haman did. So his enemy was destroyed by the device that was meant for Mordecai. Then we see Christ, who comes and dies for our sin. And from a spiritual standpoint, the thought that the devil is trying to just take Christ out. You see it at the beginning of the story in the Gospels when he's a baby and King Herod is trying to get rid of him out of jealousy. You see it as religious leaders come against him because they fear his power that he's coming into, and they fear that he's not as much his power, but his ability to shift their power or take their power away, or their perception that was happening. And then you see him going to a cross and dying. And that cross was meant to do away with him, but those who believe in what's written in the scriptures of the Bible believe that 3 days after his death, Christ was raised from the dead through the power of God. So in other words, the tree, the cross that was meant to destroy Christ, actually propelled him. His humility going to the cross kind of propelled him to the highest position where God hands all authority over to Christ. And then we see Mordecai, who was meant to be destroyed on a stake, and instead of him being destroyed, we see him being elevated to second in command. So where Christ is elevated to basically have authority over all creation, where Mordecai has authority over, the King Ahasuerus' kingdom. So it's very cool to me that stood out so clear this time. I've never, before reading through this time, never caught that. But in studying and just kind of reading through other people's thoughts on things, I kind of like how that's brought out. I think you've got Esther, you've got the Jewish people. I think there's a good representation of, hey, once Mordecai's in power, that's great. Once Christ is in power, that's great. The rules have changed, but there's still a battle that needs to be fought. There's still enemies that hate the people of God. And I think from a Christian standpoint, we don't see this as other people, though there are potentially people who do not like Christians or the beliefs that are held from a biblical worldview. But I think from a scriptural standpoint, the enemy is spiritual. The enemy is this selfish desire to turn from God and to disobey God. And that's where the real fight is. The fight is to stay focused on God and stay focused on Christ. And Christ promised that the one who can do that is going to find peace. The one who brings everything to him, brings the prayer and supplication to God, would be rewarded with peace that passes all understanding. So, and then we see in peace, that's a restful thing. We see rest. And we see the Jewish people receive joy and rest at the end of this conflict. And I think if this is a type of what's actually happening, we've got Christ who is currently reigning, his kingdom that's been established because of his death and resurrection and his obedience to his Father, to God the Father. And we see an opportunity for people to fight and to claim peace in God and to claim rest in God, because what's happening is there's no more labor, no more work. And what that means from a biblical standpoint doesn't mean that you don't do good things, that you don't work to make life better for others. What it means is that you're no longer responsible for clearing your debt of sin, because the Jewish people used to have to do that. They used to have to sacrifice animals. And about, I think about 40 years after Christ's death, their temple was destroyed and hasn't been reestablished yet. So there's no more animal sacrifices. The Bible is clear that Christ was the last sacrifice that was needed to clear the debt of sin, and that looking to him and trusting in him and giving everything over to him is the way to clear the sin, because the price has been paid. He's already taken care of it. And when that's done, then that gives us the ability to rest from our work. And what our work is that work to keep ourselves right with God. Christ has taken care of it. Now we can work through our faith to share with other people about Christ, to share with others about God's love, and how he wants us to turn from only living for ourselves and to focus only on him and what he wants. And when we can do that, all of his promises come with it. And the big one is peace and rest and joy, and things just being right. So really enjoyed reading through Esther. If you've watched all these videos, I appreciate that. I hope it was helpful for you. And I hope the future videos I do are also helpful. And then my formatting gets a little bit better. I'm really just trying to keep going here. So I thank you for your time. And I look forward to creating some more, and maybe even doing Esther again in the future if I get to that point. So I'm hoping I do. All right.